Here is my investigation update for Saturday, June 21st, 2026. Today, I'm walking through one of the busiest streets in Warsaw's old town, Poland. And while we're taking this walk together, I want us to look at what is happening with Peter Obi, the Nigerian presidency, and the question nobody on the campaign trail is asking. But first, thank you. Thank you to every single person who has been watching, sharing, and pushing this channel forward. You are not fans, you are investigators. And this community keeps growing because you understand that the truth is always in the transactions. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and share this with one person who needs to see it. Because what we are about to get into today, this one is deep. Alright, let's follow the money all the way to the top. Let's trace it. Now, let's begin.
No criminal leaves what he can steal. No criminal. That's why even if you go to church, they tell you to protect your phone. Rufai, I left almost 100 billion. When I have the powers to take it, in any other country, I have the highest award. I have the Queen's Award in the UK. I have it anywhere. But because this is a criminalized country, nobody will celebrate it.
You just heard him. And you know what? He is right. Everything he said is correct. The savings were real. The discipline was real. The numbers were documented. He is absolutely right. But, and this is where the investigation begins, he is talking about a state, not a country. He is describing what one man can do inside a small, defined financial universe where he controls the budget, controls the spending, and controls almost nothing else. A state governor in Nigeria does not control foreign exchange. He does not negotiate with the IMF. He does not service Eurobonds. He does not manage OPEC quotas or oil production sharing contracts with Shell and Total Energies. He governs a perimeter, and inside that perimeter, Peter Obi was genuinely impressive. The question this investigation is asking is what happens when you remove the perimeter? What happens when the man with those instincts walks into an office that comes preloaded with 40 years of other people's signatures? That is a different question entirely, and that is where we are going today. Here is a question that will follow you out of this video. When Nigeria elects a president, what exactly is being transferred? Power? Or responsibility for power that was already spent? Because here is what the records show. Every Nigerian president since 1986 has signed something. Loans, treaties, IMF frameworks, World Bank conditions, oil contracts, Eurobond obligations, bilateral agreements with China, with the United States, with the Gulf states. And every signature, every single one becomes a chain, a legal, financial, binding chain that is inherited by the next man who walks through the door of Aso Rock. Peter Obi wants to walk through that door, and that is where this investigation begins. Not with the man, but with the office. Not with the candidate, but with the contracts that were waiting before he arrived.
Let nobody scare you. If anybody tell you that you are from this place, if you vote this, something will happen. Telling that Peter Obi said, nobody's the owner of Nigeria.
Most Nigerians believe elections transfer power. Let me show you why that belief deserves to be questioned. There is an old principle, power is not what you hold. Power is what you are allowed to do with what you hold. And in Nigeria, that distinction matters more than any ballot paper. Because here is what a Nigerian president actually inherits on day one. He inherits a debt portfolio currently exceeding 100 trillion naira. He inherits bilateral loan agreements with China's Exim Bank, tied tied to infrastructure projects with specific operational clauses. He inherits Eurobond obligations on international markets, where any policy signal of instability triggers immediate capital flight. He inherits production sharing contracts with international oil companies, Shell, Total Energies, Chevron, ExxonMobil, signed across multiple administrations, some going back to the 1990s. He inherits an IMF relationship that is not a friendship. It is a framework that comes with expectations. And those expectations do not disappear when a new face wins the election. So when Nigerians chant a candidate's name in the stadium, what they are really doing is choosing who manages all of that. Not who controls it, who manages it. There is a difference. And that difference is the story most people are not telling. Now, let us talk about what Peter Obi actually did, because the record is real and it deserves serious examination. Not celebration, not dismissal, examination. When Peter Obi became governor of Anambra State in 2006, he inherited a state that was financially broken. Security was a crisis, infrastructure was collapsing, the treasury was empty. And what Obi proceeded to do over the next 8 years was genuinely unusual for a Nigerian governor. He reduced recurrent expenditure. He moved Anambra's financial reserves from essentially nothing to over 75 billion naira in external reserves and investments. He prioritized capital projects over political patronage. He left office and handed his successor a functioning treasury. His supporters point to this, and they are right to point to it. But here is where the investigation has to pause. Because what did Obi not control as governor of Anambra? He did not control foreign exchange. He did not control OPEC quotas. He did not control the naira. He did not control Nigeria's external debt schedule. He did not control IMF negotiations. He did not control oil production. He did not control the federal revenue sharing formula that determined how much Anambra received from Abuja every month. He did not sit in any room where Nigeria's international financial obligations were being discussed. He operated inside a small, defined universe. And inside that universe, his instincts worked. The question this investigation is asking is simple. What happens when you take those same instincts and place them inside a universe 10 times larger, with obligations signed by 5 administrations before you arrived? That is not a theoretical question. That is the actual question. Now let us go somewhere his supporters do not like to go. Because before we can trust the moral framework of any leader, we have to follow their money, not their speeches. Their money. In 2021, the Pandora Papers were released. This was the largest leak of financial documents in history, 11.9 million records from offshore financial service providers. And inside those documents, Peter Obi's name appeared. The records showed that Peter Obi held shares in an offshore company registered in the British Virgin Islands, a jurisdiction whose entire function in the global financial system is to shield assets from public view. The company was called Gabriella Properties Limited, and it was not declared to Nigerian authorities during his time as governor. Now, Peter Obi's supporters will say this is not illegal. They are technically correct. Offshore holding structures are legal instruments used by wealthy individuals globally. But let us apply the investigator's standard, not the lawyer's standard, not whether it was legal, but what it tells us about judgment. Here is a man who built his entire political identity on frugality, on saving money for the people, on refusing to steal from the treasury, on transparency as a governing philosophy. And yet, when it came to his own money, the structure he chose was one designed by its very nature to avoid visibility. The British Virgin Islands does not exist to attract business with its beaches. It exists because it does not ask questions, because it does not share records, because it keeps secrets. So the question this investigation puts on the table is this: if a man chooses invisibility for his own money while demanding transparency for public money, which version of Peter Obi governs Nigeria? The public version or the private version? And here here is where the record gets more uncomfortable. After Obi left power in Anambra in 2014, his successor Willie Obiano from the same APGA party did not continue the savings culture. The financial discipline that Obi built over 8 years began to erode almost immediately. By the time Charles Soludo arrived in 2022, Anambra's finances were again under serious pressure. Now, is that Obi's fault? No, a man cannot control what his successor does. But it raises a structural question that this channel cannot ignore. If the discipline was personal to Obi and not institutional, then it was not a system, it was a personality. And personalities cannot be transferred, and personalities cannot survive the weight of a federal presidency. Because a federal presidency does not run on personality, it runs on institutions. And institutions in Nigeria have been deliberately weakened for decades by the same system that any new president must now navigate. This is where the investigation gets precise. Let us talk about the actual chains. Not metaphorical chains, documented, binding, enforceable chains. Chain 1. The IMF framework and subsidy removal. In 2021, under Buhari, Nigeria entered into a $3.4 billion emergency financing arrangement with the IMF under its rapid financing instrument. The conditions attached to IMF support do not appear in a printed list of demands. They operate through what economists call signaling. If Nigeria moves away from market-oriented reforms, if a new president reinstates fuel subsidy, for example, the IMF withdraws its favorable assessment. And when the IMF withdraws its favorable assessment, Eurobond investors take notice. And when Eurobond investors take notice, Nigeria's borrowing costs spikes. And when borrowing costs spike on a country spending over 90% of revenue on debt service, the consequences are not theoretical. They are immediate. They are felt in the exchange rate. They are felt at the pump. They are felt in food prices. So when Peter Obi's supporters say he will restore the subsidy that Tinubu removed, the investigation asks, at what cost? And who pays that cost? Chain 2. The World Bank Development Policy Operations. Between 2020 and 2023, Nigeria received multiple World Bank development policy loans, budget support financing explicitly tied to reform benchmarks, electricity tariff reforms, fiscal federalism adjustments, exchange rate unification. These are not suggestions, they are conditions attached to disbursements already received. Any incoming president who reverses those benchmarks risks triggering technical default on the associated policy commitments and losing access to the next tranche of concessional financing. Chain 3. The Chinese bilateral loans. Under Buhari alone, Nigeria borrowed approximately $5.3 billion from China's Exim Bank for infrastructure projects, the Lagos-Ibadan Railway, the Abuja-Kaduna Railway, the Coastal Railway. The terms of these loans include clauses that grant Chinese contractors experimental rights and, in some documented versions from other African countries, sovereign asset waiver clauses in case of default. Nigeria's specific clauses have not been fully disclosed to the public. That itself is a problem. But what is known is this: these loans cannot be walked away from. They are inherited, they are serviced, or they are defaulted on. And a country that defaults on Chinese bilateral loans loses access to the entire ecosystem of Chinese infrastructure financing at a moment when Nigeria needs infrastructure more than almost anything else. Chain 4. The Constitution itself. Section 5 of the 1999 Constitution grants executive powers to the president, but those powers exist within a framework of constraints that most Nigerians have never read. The president cannot spend money not appropriated by the National Assembly. The president cannot unilaterally renegotiate international treaties without Senate approval. The president operates within a revenue-sharing formula, the RMAFC formula, that is itself a political negotiation frozen into law. The CBN, under the CBN Act of 2007, operates with an independence framework that limits direct presidential instruction. The Fiscal Responsibility Law creates additional constraints on borrowing and expenditure. In other words, the Constitution gives the president power and then surrounds that power with walls. And those walls were not built by accident. This story did not begin with Tinubu. It did not begin with Buhari. It did not even begin with Obasanjo. It began in 1986. Under Ibrahim Babangida, Nigeria formally accepted the Structural Adjustment Program promoted by the IMF and World Bank. Currency devaluation, privatization of state enterprises, removal of subsidies, trade liberalization, market-oriented exchange rate management. Now here is what the record shows 40 years later. Obasanjo, same direction. Yaradua, same direction. Jonathan, same direction. Buhari, who campaigned against subsidy removal, eventually removed subsidy. Tinubu accelerated the same direction. Different parties, different personalities, different campaign promises, same direction. And this is where this investigation forces a question that will make some viewers deeply uncomfortable. What if Nigerian elections changed the driver but not the road? What if the road was built in 1986 and every president since then has simply been handed the steering wheel of a vehicle already moving in a direction they did not choose? There is an African saying, the man who inherits a fire does not choose what was already burning when he arrived. Peter Obi did not choose the IMF framework. He did not sign the Chinese loans. He did not agree to the Eurobond terms. He did not write the 1999 constitution. But if he becomes president of Nigeria, every single one of those things becomes his responsibility. And the investigation asks, what exactly does his moral instinct do with that? There are two constitutions governing Nigeria, the one Nigerians read and the one international creditors read. The one Nigerians read is 318 pages. It lives in law libraries and is quoted at political rallies. The other one is not a document. It is a distributed system. It lives in the terms of the $1.7 billion Eurobond issued in 2021. It lives in the production sharing contracts signed with Shell and Total Energies. It lives in the bilateral investment treaties Nigeria has signed with 26 countries. Treaties that give foreign investors the right to sue Nigeria in international arbitration if policy changes damage their investments. It lives in the OPEC quota agreement that caps how much oil Nigeria can produce, and therefore how much revenue any president can work with. No Nigerian citizen voted for any of that, and yet every Nigerian president must confront all of it, every single day. So when Obi's supporters say he will run Nigeria like he ran Anambra, the forensic question is not whether he has the discipline. We have seen the discipline. The question is whether the office allows discipline to be the primary variable, or whether the office is primarily a negotiation between what a president believes and what the system permits. Ask yourself this. You are Peter Obi. You have just won the Nigerian presidency. It is day one in Aso Rock. Your finance minister walks in. He places 3 documents on the table. The first is a Eurobond coupon payment due in 30 days. The second is a World Bank disbursement condition requiring proof of continued exchange rate reform. The third is a report showing that 40 million Nigerians cannot afford fuel at current market prices. What do you do? And whatever answer you choose, which agreement do you break? Because you cannot honor all 3 simultaneously. This is not a hypothetical. This is the actual inbox of the Nigerian presidency every month. Here is what this investigation concludes. Peter Obi may be exactly what his supporters say he is. Disciplined, frugal, honest by the standards of Nigerian politics. The Anambra record, taken on its own terms, is real. It happened. It was documented. But the Nigerian presidency is not Anambra scaled up. It is a fundamentally different institution. It is an institution shaped by 40 years of accumulated agreements, signed across 9 administrations, with counterparties who do not care who won the election. They care about the repayment schedule. They care about the reform benchmarks. They care about the clauses in the contract. And the contracts do not renegotiate themselves because a new man with good intentions walked into the room. So the debate Nigerians are having, Obi versus Tinubu, LP versus APC, is a real debate. But it may be the wrong level of debate. The deeper question, the one this channel is placing on the table, is this. How much of Nigeria is still free to govern? How much has already been promised? How much has already been signed? How much sovereignty remains after 40 years of structural adjustment, bilateral loans, Eurobond obligations, and production sharing contracts negotiated in rooms that Nigerian citizens were never invited into? Because history shows something uncomfortable. Presidents come and go, parties rise and fall, Faces change at the podium. Campaign promises are made with conviction, and yet the direction remains strangely consistent, which forces the ultimate question. Is Nigeria choosing leaders or merely selecting new custodians to manage obligations that were accumulated long before the election was called? Understanding this does not mean surrender. It means precision. The Nigerian citizen who understands the structural constraints of the presidency is harder to manipulate. They cannot be sold a simple hero. They cannot be pacified with a simple villain. They begin to ask the right questions. Not just who is president, but what did the last administration sign? What are the terms? What are the clauses? What is the actual policy space available to whoever wins? That is a more dangerous citizen, and that is the point of this investigation. Because change that is durable does not come from electing a better personality into a broken structure. It comes from understanding the structure well enough to demand that the structure itself be renegotiated. That begins with knowing what was signed, and who signed it, and why. Send this to one Nigerian, not because it tells them who to vote for, but because it asks the question that nobody on the campaign trail is asking. The truth is in the transactions. Follow the money. You are watching Historic Capital.